In the beginning, words were sacred. They were spoken slowly, carefully, often surrounded by silence. In ancient times, people spoke because something truly needed to be said. A word carried weight. A sentence could change a life. Silence was not something to be avoided. It was the natural space in which meaning could appear. Today, words have multiplied beyond measure. They spill endlessly from mouths, screens, notifications, opinions, and reactions. We speak to be heard, to be noticed, to defend ourselves, to prove our worth, to fill the emptiness we are afraid to face. In this constant stream, words no longer clarify reality. They drown it. What was once language has become noise. From a Buddhist perspective, this noise is not only external. It is primarily internal. Even when the mouth is closed, the mind continues to speak. It judges, compares, replays the past, imagines the future, and narrates every moment as if silence were dangerous. This inner commentary never rests. It is this continuous mental chatter that keeps suffering alive. The Buddha observed that much of human suffering does not arise from events themselves, but from the stories we tell about them. A harsh word spoken by another person lasts only a moment, yet the mind repeats it for days, months, sometimes years. A mistake happens once, but the inner voice replays it endlessly, layering shame upon memory. Words, when clung to, become seeds of restlessness. In Buddhist teaching, speech is one of the doors through which craving and ignorance enter. Not only the words we speak aloud, but the silent arguments we rehearse within. The mind loves to explain, justify, accuse, and defend. It believes that if it can find the right words, peace will follow. Yet the opposite often happens. The more we explain, the more entangled we become. Consider a simple disagreement. One person speaks, the other responds, and soon both are no longer listening. Words pile upon words, each sentence sharpening the sense of separation. The original issue fades, replaced by the need to win, to be right, to protect the self-image. In such moments, words do not heal. They wound. The Buddha once compared unguarded speech to a fire that spreads quickly when fed by dry grass. Each reaction becomes fuel for the next. The flames grow higher, consuming clarity and compassion. Silence, by contrast, is like removing the fuel. Without new words to sustain it, the fire naturally dies down. Modern life rarely allows this kind of silence. From the moment we wake, we are surrounded by voices. News, messages, conversations, social media, advertisements. Even when alone, we reach for devices to avoid the quiet. Silence feels uncomfortable, almost threatening. It exposes something we would rather not see. Why are we so afraid of silence? Because silence does not distract. It reveals. When words stop, the mind turns inward. Unresolved emotions surface. Grief, fear, anger, loneliness, feelings long buried beneath activity and conversation begin to make themselves known. Silence removes the mask. It does not allow escape. Many people believe that silence means emptiness, boredom, or withdrawal. In Buddhist understanding, silence is none of these. Silence is presence. It is the space in which awareness becomes clear. But to enter that space, one must be willing to meet what arises without commentary. This is precisely why silence is avoided. Words give the illusion of control. As long as the mind is speaking, it feels busy, productive, alive. Silence feels like losing ground. Yet this is a misunderstanding. True loss occurs when we mistake noise for life and forget how to listen. The Buddha often remained silent when asked certain questions, not because he lacked answers, but because he understood that some questions arise from confusion rather than wisdom. To answer them with words would only deepen misunderstanding. In such moments, silence was not refusal. It was compassion. Words can point, but they cannot deliver truth directly. They are symbols, not reality itself. When clung to, they become obstacles. When released, they can dissolve into silence, allowing insight to arise naturally. In meditation, one begins to see this clearly. At first, the mind resists silence. Thoughts shout louder, as if afraid of being ignored. Memories surface. Plans demand attention. Opinions insist on being heard. This is not a failure of practice. It is the mind revealing its habitual dependence on noise. With patient observation, something remarkable happens. When thoughts are not fed, when they are neither followed nor suppressed, they begin to lose momentum. The inner dialogue slows. Gaps appear. In those gaps, silence emerges, not as absence, but as a living presence. This silence is not something created. It was always there, hidden beneath layers of unnecessary speech. Like a lake disturbed by constant wind, the mind cannot reflect clearly when words agitate its surface. When the wind stops, the water becomes still. Reflection becomes possible. In daily life, the same principle applies. Not every situation requires a response. Not every thought deserves expression. Not every emotion needs to be explained. Learning to recognize when words add clarity and when they only add noise is a form of wisdom. Right speech in Buddhism is not merely about speaking kindly or truthfully. It is also about knowing when not to speak. Silence can be an expression of understanding. It can prevent harm. It can protect peace. There is a story of a monk who was insulted repeatedly by another man. Each time, the monk remained silent. Finally, the man demanded, "Why do you not answer me?" The monk replied calmly, "If someone offers you a gift and you do not accept it, to whom does it belong?" The man fell silent. In that moment, the teaching was complete. Words often prolong suffering because they keep conflict alive. Silence allows them to end. This does not mean suppressing truth or avoiding responsibility. It means recognizing that not all truths are verbal, and not all healing comes through explanation. When words become noise, silence becomes medicine. The first step toward inner freedom is not learning what to say, but learning when to stop speaking, both outwardly and inwardly. To notice how much of our speech is driven by fear, habit, or the desire to control. To see how often we talk not to connect, but to protect an image of ourselves. As this awareness grows, silence is no longer feared. It becomes a refuge, a place where the mind can rest, a space where reality is no longer filtered through constant narration. In this silence, we begin to listen again, not only to others, but to life itself, to the subtle movements of the heart, to the impermanent nature of thoughts and emotions, to the quiet wisdom that does not shout, does not argue, does not demand. When words fall away, truth does not disappear. It becomes clearer, and thus, the journey begins, not by adding more teachings, more explanations, more answers, but by rediscovering the power of silence, the language we never truly lost, only forgot how to hear. Those who came to the Buddha often arrived with heavy questions. Some sought answers about suffering, others about the nature of the self, the universe, life after death, or the meaning of existence itself. They came carrying words formed by fear, curiosity, pride, and longing. Many expected long explanations, intricate philosophies, or powerful declarations. Sometimes the Buddha gave them exactly that. At other times, he said nothing at all. To an untrained mind, this silence appeared puzzling, even dismissive. Why would an enlightened teacher, capable of such profound insight, choose not to speak? Yet for those who stayed, who remained present without demanding an answer, something subtle and transformative occurred. The silence itself became the teaching. In Buddhist tradition, silence is not emptiness. It is fullness without form. It is awareness resting in itself, unfragmented by concepts. When the Buddha remained silent, he was not withholding wisdom. He was inviting direct experience. There's a well-known account of a monk who asked the Buddha a series of metaphysical questions. Is the universe eternal or not? Is the soul the same as the body or different? What happens to the enlightened one after death? After each question, the Buddha remained silent. The monk grew frustrated. He believed that without answers, the path was incomplete. Later, the Buddha explained that these questions were not conducive to liberation. They were born from intellectual curiosity, not from the wish to end suffering. Answering them would be like treating a man wounded by a poisoned arrow by first debating who shot it, what the arrow was made of, and where the feathers came from. The man would die before any conclusion was reached. Silence, in this context, was mercy. The Buddha understood that words can easily become traps. Concepts give the mind something to hold on to, and the mind clings eagerly. Yet clinging, even to spiritual ideas, binds one to suffering. Silence removes the object of attachment. It leaves nothing for the ego to grasp. Many of the Buddha's closest disciples learned this lesson not through sermons, but through presence. They observed how he sat, how he walked, how he listened. His stillness was not passive. It was alive with awareness. In his presence, the mind naturally quieted. This is a phenomenon that cannot be explained fully through language. Just as calm water influences the waves around it, a silent mind influences other minds. When someone abides in deep awareness, their silence carries a quality that words cannot imitate. Disciples often reported that simply sitting near the Buddha brought clarity. Their thoughts slowed. Their questions dissolved. Problems that once felt urgent lost their grip. Nothing had been explained, yet something had been understood. This points to a central truth in Buddhist wisdom. Awakening is not transmitted through information. It is recognized through direct seeing. Words can guide the seeker toward the path, but they cannot walk it for them. Silence, however, creates the conditions in which walking becomes possible. There is a story of a disciple who once asked the Buddha to summarize his teaching in a single sentence. The Buddha held up a flower and said nothing. Most of those present were confused. Only one disciple smiled. In that moment, it was said that true understanding was transmitted without a word. This story does not suggest that teachings are useless. The Buddha spoke for decades, offering guidance, ethical principles, and methods of practice. But he also knew their limits. At a certain point, words must fall away. Silence is the ground beyond explanation. In meditation, practitioners begin to encounter this truth themselves. At first, they rely heavily on instructions. Observe the breath. Notice sensations. Watch thoughts arise and pass. These words are necessary guides. But as practice deepens, the meditator realizes that awareness does not require commentary. Breathing happens without description. Sensations arise without labels. Awareness knows directly, without translating experience into language. This is the same silence that surrounded the Buddha. It is not a forced quiet. It is not suppression. It is the natural stillness that remains when grasping ends. Many people misunderstand silence as withdrawal from the world. They imagine monks retreating into caves, rejecting life and society. Yet the Buddha himself engaged constantly with others. He taught kings, beggars, merchants, and criminals. His silence did not isolate him. It grounded him. He spoke when words could reduce suffering. He remained silent when words would confuse or entangle. This discernment is a form of deep compassion. In everyday life, we often feel pressure to respond immediately. Silence is mistaken for weakness, ignorance, or indifference. But the Buddha demonstrated another possibility. Silence can be strength. Silence can be clarity. Silence can be respect for the complexity of reality. When the Buddha encountered grief, he did not rush to console with explanations. When faced with anger, he did not argue. He allowed space. In that space, people often found their own insight. Silence invites responsibility. Without being given an answer, one must look within. This inward turning is essential for liberation. The Buddha never claimed ownership of truth. He pointed, then stepped aside. His silence reminded his disciples that freedom could not be handed over. It had to be discovered. In the presence of silence, the mind behaves differently. Without external stimulation, it reveals its habits. Restlessness becomes visible. Craving becomes obvious. Fear emerges, but so does peace. This is why silence can feel uncomfortable at first. It removes distraction, but with patience, it becomes familiar. Eventually, it feels like home. Those who truly learned from the Buddha understood that his silence was not an absence of teaching, but its highest expression. It demonstrated trust in the listener's capacity for awakening. Silence says, "You already have what you are seeking." This teaching is deeply relevant today. In a world saturated with information, opinions, and endless explanations, we rarely allow space for understanding to arise on its own. We seek answers externally, forgetting that wisdom is experiential. The Buddha's silence reminds us that not every question should be answered immediately. Some questions must be lived, others must be released. When we sit in silence, without trying to solve ourselves, something gentle unfolds. The mind softens, the heart opens. Insight appears not as a conclusion, but as recognition. This is the silence that heals, the silence that teaches without teaching, the silence that dissolves confusion rather than feeding it. To be in the presence of such silence is to stand at the edge of awakening, not because something new is given, but because something unnecessary falls away. And when that happens, the truth that words could never capture becomes unmistakably clear. Silence is often misunderstood as emptiness, but what people truly fear is not emptiness, it is exposure. When words stop, when distractions fall away, when the noise of the world fades, something intimate and unavoidable appears, the self as it is. Most people do not fear silence because it is dull. They fear it because it is honest. In Buddhist understanding, silence does not create discomfort. It reveals what was already there. The restlessness, anxiety, sadness, and unresolved longing that surface in silence were never caused by quiet. They were merely hidden beneath layers of sound, conversation, and activity. This is why silence feels threatening. From childhood, we are taught to fill space. A quiet room is quickly animated with music. A pause in conversation is rushed to be covered with words. Loneliness is avoided with entertainment. Even moments meant for rest are invaded by screens and thoughts. Silence is treated as a problem to be solved. Yet the Buddha taught that what we avoid holds the key to liberation. When silence arises, the mind often reacts with urgency. Thoughts begin to shout. Memories replay themselves. Plans for the future appear suddenly important. The mind invents reasons to escape. Something to do, something to check, something to say. This reaction is not random. It is conditioning. The mind is accustomed to movement. It survives by engagement. Silence threatens its dominance. In silence, the narratives that define identity begin to weaken. Without constant commentary, the sense of I becomes less solid. This is deeply unsettling for the ego. It prefers noise because noise reinforces continuity, a past to defend, a future to control, a story to maintain. Silence interrupts this story. In meditation, beginners often encounter this fear directly. They sit down with the intention to be still, and within moments, discomfort arises. The body feels restless. The mind protests. Thoughts claim urgency. Emotional waves surface unexpectedly. The practitioner wonders if they're doing something wrong. They are not. This resistance is the mind's habitual response to losing control. Silence removes the usual escape routes. One can no longer hide behind words, roles, or explanations. There is only direct experience, sensations, emotions, awareness itself. This exposure can feel overwhelming, especially for those who have spent years avoiding inner contact. The Buddha described this avoidance as a form of ignorance, not stupidity, but a refusal to see clearly. We fear what we have not befriended. We run from what we have not understood. Silence asks us to stop running. Another reason silence is feared is because it dismantles certainty. Words create structure. They categorize experience. They tell us who we are, what we believe, where we stand. Silence dissolves these boundaries. In silence, things are less defined, more fluid. This can feel like groundlessness. Yet groundlessness is not danger. It is openness. The fear arises because we mistake control for safety. We believe that as long as we are thinking, speaking, analyzing, we are protected. But this protection is illusory. It is precisely the constant mental activity that keeps suffering alive. In silence, there is no script, no defense, no performance. And so, many people interpret silence as loneliness. But loneliness is not caused by silence. It is caused by disconnection from oneself. Silence simply reveals that disconnection. There's a profound difference between solitude and isolation. Solitude is silence with presence. Isolation is noise without connection. Many live in constant noise and still feel alone. Few dare to enter silence and discover companionship within. The Buddha did not encourage silence as an escape from life, but as a return to it. When we stop filling space, life begins to speak in subtler ways. Breath becomes noticeable. The body communicates. Emotions express themselves without drama. Awareness becomes intimate. But this intimacy requires courage. To sit in silence is to meet grief without numbing it. To feel fear without naming it away. To encounter emptiness without rushing to fill it. This is why silence feels like standing naked before oneself. And yet, this nakedness is freedom. Another layer of fear arises from social conditioning. Silence is often interpreted as rejection. When someone remains silent, others assume disapproval, superiority, or withdrawal. This makes us afraid to be silent with others, even when words are unnecessary. We speak to avoid misunderstanding. We speak to reassure. We speak to prove that we belong. But silence, when grounded in awareness, communicates more truthfully than words. It listens without agenda. It allows others to be as they are. It does not impose meaning. The Buddha demonstrated this repeatedly. His silence was never cold. It was spacious. Those around him felt seen, not ignored. The problem is not silence itself, but unconscious silence. Silence driven by fear, avoidance, or suppression. Buddhist silence is the opposite. It is silence rooted in presence. This distinction is essential. Silence used to avoid responsibility hardens the heart. Silence used to listen softens it. Silence used to escape reality creates distance. Silence used to meet reality creates intimacy. The fear of silence dissolves when this difference is understood. As practice deepens, silence transforms. What was once uncomfortable becomes nourishing. What once felt empty becomes full. The mind begins to trust stillness. The heart begins to rest. Silence becomes a place of refuge, not threat. At this stage, practitioners notice something unexpected. Silence is not quiet because nothing is happening. It is quiet because nothing is resisted. Experience flows without friction. Thoughts may arise, but they no longer dominate. Emotions may appear, but they are allowed to pass. In silence, we learn that we are not our thoughts. We are not our stories. We are not the constant voice narrating experience. This realization is unsettling at first. Who are we if not these things? The Buddha's answer was never given in words. It was revealed in silence. When fear of silence fades, a deeper trust emerges. Trust in awareness. Trust in impermanence. Trust in the natural intelligence of life unfolding without control. Silence teaches us that we do not need to hold everything together. We can let go and still be whole. In a world obsessed with expression, silence becomes a radical act. It is the courage to pause, to not know, to listen without preparing a response, to be present without explanation. This courage is the beginning of wisdom. The fear of silence is not an obstacle on the path. It is the threshold. Beyond it lies a freedom that words can describe but never deliver. And once crossed, silence is no longer something to endure. It becomes something to return to, again and again, as a reminder of who we are beneath the noise. The first time one sits down to meditate, silence does not feel still. It feels crowded. The body fidgets, The breath seems awkward, and the mind becomes louder than it has ever been. Thoughts appear in rapid succession. Unfinished conversations, old regrets, future plans, sudden worries. Many beginners conclude that meditation is making their mind worse. In truth, meditation is simply revealing what was already there. In everyday life, mental noise is masked by activity. We move, speak, scroll, plan, and react. The mind is constantly stimulated, so its restlessness goes unnoticed. When external noise is reduced, internal noise becomes impossible to ignore. This is not a failure of practice. It is the beginning of clarity. From a Buddhist perspective, silence is not something to be forced upon the mind. Stillness cannot be commanded. It must be allowed. Entering the stillness of the mind is not about stopping thoughts, but about changing one's relationship to them. The Buddha taught that the mind is conditioned by habit. For years, perhaps decades, it has been trained to chase pleasure, avoid discomfort, and comment on everything in between. When meditation begins, the mind continues doing what it knows best. Expecting immediate silence is like expecting a river to stop flowing the moment one sits beside it. The practice is not to dam the river, but to sit and watch. At first, this watching feels passive, even frustrating. The meditator notices how little control they seem to have. Thoughts arise without permission. Emotions shift unpredictably. The desire to interfere is strong. The mind wants to fix, analyze, suppress, or replace what is happening. This desire to control is itself the source of agitation. Silence in meditation begins not when thoughts disappear, but when resistance softens. When thoughts are allowed to arise and pass without being followed, judged, or pushed away, they gradually lose their urgency. They come and go like sounds in the distance, noticed but no longer commanding attention. Stillness is not the absence of movement. It is the absence of struggle. Breath becomes the first anchor, not as an object to manipulate, but as a rhythm to accompany. Breathing happens naturally. When attention rests gently on the breath, the mind begins to settle, not because it is forced to be quiet, but because it has something simple and present to attend to. This simplicity is essential. The modern mind is accustomed to complexity. It believes that meaningful practice must be difficult or intense. Yet the Buddha emphasized simplicity again and again. Awareness of breathing, awareness of posture, awareness of sensation. These humble practices lead the mind back to stillness. As attention stabilizes, gaps begin to appear between thoughts. At first, they are brief, just a moment of quiet before the next thought arises. The meditator may not even notice them at first, but with patience, these gaps widen. In these moments, silence is experienced not as blankness, but as presence. There is awareness without commentary, sensation without interpretation, being without narrative. This is the stillness of the mind. It does not feel dramatic. It feels ordinary, gentle, and grounded. There is no sense of achievement, no fireworks of insight. And yet, something fundamental has shifted. The mind is no longer chasing itself. The Buddha described this as the calming of formations, the gradual quieting of mental activity driven by habit. This calming is not produced by willpower, but by understanding. When the mind sees that following every thought leads to restlessness, it naturally lets go. Silence then is not imposed. It is discovered. One of the most important insights in meditation is realizing that awareness itself is already silent. Thoughts are objects appearing within awareness, not awareness itself. When attention rests in awareness rather than in thought content, stillness becomes apparent. This realization changes everything. The meditator no longer tries to silence the mind. They learn to rest as the space in which the mind moves. Thoughts may continue, but they no longer disturb. Like clouds moving across the sky, they do not alter the sky's nature. This is the stillness the Buddha pointed to. It is not fragile. It does not depend on perfect conditions. It can coexist with sound, movement, and even thought. It is a deep stability beneath surface activity. As practice deepens, the body also responds. Muscles soften, breathing becomes more subtle. The nervous system shifts from alertness to rest. Silence becomes embodied, not just mental. This embodied stillness is profoundly healing. Many people carry chronic tension without realizing it. The body holds unresolved emotions, stress, and fear. In silence, these patterns begin to unwind. Sensations may intensify temporarily: tightness in the chest, heaviness in the stomach, warmth, or trembling. These are not obstacles. They are signs of release. The practice is to remain present without labeling or reacting. In doing so, the meditator learns a crucial lesson. Peace does not require comfort. It requires openness. When experience is allowed to be exactly as it is, without resistance, suffering loses its grip. This is why silence is central to Buddhist meditation. Silence removes distraction, but more importantly, it reveals the mechanics of suffering. It shows how craving, aversion, and ignorance operate moment by moment. And in seeing clearly, the mind begins to free itself. Another misunderstanding is that silence leads to passivity. On the contrary, silence sharpens awareness. When the mind is no longer cluttered with unnecessary commentary, perception becomes clearer. One notices subtle shifts in breath, posture, emotion, and intention. This clarity extends beyond the meditation cushion. As practitioners become familiar with inner stillness, they begin to carry it into daily life. Conversations feel less reactive. Decisions feel less rushed. There is a pause between stimulus and response. In that pause, wisdom has room to appear. The Buddha emphasized this pause. It is the space where freedom lives. Stillness does not mean withdrawing from life. It means meeting life without agitation, acting without being driven by compulsion, speaking without being pushed by fear or desire. In meditation, silence teaches the mind that it does not need to comment on everything to function. It can simply know. This knowing is intimate, direct, and uncomplicated. Over time, the meditator begins to trust silence. What once felt empty now feels supportive. What once felt threatening now feels safe. Silence becomes a refuge, not because it excludes experience, but because it welcomes it fully. The stillness of the mind is not an altered state to be maintained. It is a natural condition to be recognized. It arises whenever the mind stops fighting itself. The Buddha did not promise constant calm. He promised understanding. Stillness arises and fades like all conditioned experiences, but each glimpse leaves a trace. The mind learns that peace is possible without control. This learning is irreversible. Once one has tasted true stillness, even briefly, the search for peace through noise loses its appeal. The mind knows another way. Entering the stillness of the mind is not an escape from the world. It is a return to reality, unfiltered by compulsive thought. It is the ground from which compassion, clarity, and wisdom naturally arise. And it begins always with silence, not as a goal to reach, but as a space to enter. There is a kind of listening that requires no ears. It does not depend on words, tones, or explanations. It is a listening that happens before interpretation, before judgment, before meaning is assigned. In Buddhist practice, this form of listening is not learned through instruction alone. It is discovered through silence. When the Buddha spoke of mindfulness, he was not describing a technique of concentration alone. He was pointing to a quality of awareness that listens openly to whatever arises, without interference. This listening is not passive. It is alert, intimate, and deeply present. Most people believe they're listening when they are, in fact, waiting to respond, waiting to agree or disagree, waiting to confirm what they already believe. This is not listening. It is anticipation disguised as attention. True listening begins when the mind stops preparing answers. In meditation, this becomes immediately apparent. When the practitioner sits in silence, There is nothing external to listen to, no teacher speaking, no sound demanding attention. And yet, experience continues to unfold. Sensations arise, thoughts appear, emotions move through the body. Something is always happening. The question is not whether there's something to hear, but whether one can listen without reacting. Listening without sound means allowing experience to present itself exactly as it is, without trying to shape it into a story. It means noticing thoughts without entering into dialogue with them, feeling emotions without labeling them as problems, observing sensations without seeking to change them. This form of listening requires courage because it removes the familiar tools of control. The mind is accustomed to engagement. It wants to comment, evaluate, and explain. Silence deprives it of these habits. When there is nothing to respond to outwardly, the inward response becomes visible. At first, this can feel overwhelming. The practitioner may notice how quickly the mind jumps to conclusions. A sensation in the chest becomes anxiety. A memory becomes regret. A quiet moment becomes boredom. Each label creates distance between awareness and experience. Listening without sound asks for something radical, to remain with experience before naming it. This does not mean suppressing thought or denying understanding. It means recognizing that naming is secondary. Experience exists prior to description. When we listen at this level, something shifts. We're no longer trapped inside our interpretations. The Buddha referred to this as bare attention, knowing what is happening as it is happening without embellishment. This bare attention is inherently silent. It does not argue. It does not explain. It simply knows. As meditation deepens, practitioners begin to notice the difference between hearing and listening. Hearing is automatic. Listening is intentional. Hearing registers sound. Listening opens to meaning beyond sound. In silence, listening turns inward. Thoughts arise like whispers in a quiet room. Instead of following them, the practitioner listens to their texture. Are they fast or slow, heavy or light, repetitive or fleeting? This observation does not require engagement. It requires curiosity without attachment. In doing so, thoughts lose their authority. They are seen as events, not commands. The same is true of emotions. Anger, sadness, fear, and joy all have energetic signatures. They are felt in the body. Tightness, warmth, pressure, expansion. When listened to without commentary, emotions reveal their impermanent nature. They move, shift, and dissolve on their own. Listening without sound allows emotions to complete themselves. This is profoundly healing. Much suffering arises not from emotion itself, but from resistance to emotion. We push away discomfort. We cling to pleasure. We judge what arises. Silence removes the usual strategies of avoidance. Listening invites acceptance. Acceptance, in Buddhist understanding, is not resignation. It is recognition. It is the willingness to allow experience to be what it is, without adding unnecessary struggle. When a mind listens in this way, insight arises naturally. One begins to see patterns clearly. How a thought leads to tension. How resistance creates contraction. How letting go brings ease. These insights are not intellectual. They are experiential. They arise from direct listening. The Buddha emphasized that wisdom does not come from accumulating information, but from seeing clearly. This clarity is born in silence. Another dimension of listening without sound emerges in relation to the present moment. Without words to divide experience, the sense of time softens. Past and future lose their grip. There is only what is happening now. In this immediacy, the mind rests. Silence allows the practitioner to listen to subtleties that are usually overlooked. The pause between breaths, the space between thoughts, the quiet satisfaction of simply being. These subtleties carry deep intelligence. They teach impermanence not as a concept, but as lived reality. Each sensation arises and fades. Each thought appears and disappears. Nothing needs to be forced to end. Everything knows how to complete itself. Listening without sound reveals this natural order. As trust in this process grows, the practitioner stops trying to manage experience. Silence becomes less threatening and more supportive. It feels like being held by awareness itself. This listening is not limited to meditation. It transforms the way one relates to others. When someone speaks, listening without sound means hearing beyond their words. It means sensing emotion, intention, and vulnerability. It means not rushing to reply, not filling silence with advice, not imposing interpretation. This kind of listening creates safety. People often feel deeply seen when they are listened to in silence. They may not receive solutions, but they feel understood. This understanding is not conveyed through words, but through presence. The Buddha embodied this presence. When people came to him with suffering, he did not immediately explain or instruct. He listened. His silence allowed others to hear themselves more clearly. This is the power of listening without sound. It is an act of respect. It acknowledges that wisdom cannot be imposed. It must emerge from within. In a world saturated with noise, this kind of listening is rare. We are trained to respond quickly, to have opinions, to offer explanations. Silence feels unproductive, yet it is often the most productive space for insight. Listening without sound teaches patience. It slows the impulse to fix. It allows understanding to mature. In meditation, this patience deepens into equanimity. The mind learns to remain balanced in the face of changing experience. Pleasure and discomfort are met with the same openness. Silence becomes steady, not dependent on conditions. This steadiness is the foundation of wisdom. When the mind listens without sound, it begins to recognize a deeper silence beneath all activity. This silence is not created by meditation. It is revealed by it. It is the background of awareness itself. Thoughts, sensations, and emotions come and go within this silence, but they do not disturb it. The practitioner begins to rest in this background, rather than being pulled into the foreground of experience. This shift marks a turning point in practice. Life is no longer something to manage constantly. It becomes something to listen to. The Buddha's teachings point again and again to this listening, not as a technique, but as a way of being, a way of relating to experience without domination. Listening without sound is the art of letting life speak for itself. In this listening, the mind discovers that it does not need to control or interpret everything to understand. Awareness itself is intelligent. Silence itself knows. And when this is realized, silence is no longer empty. It is full of understanding. For much of human life, the mind is driven by questions. Why did this happen? Who am I really? What should I do next? How can I be free from suffering? Questions arise endlessly, each one leading to another, like steps in a staircase that never reaches the top. The mind believes that somewhere ahead, there is a final answer that will bring peace. In Buddhist understanding, this search itself is part of the restlessness. Questions are not wrong. They are often the beginning of the path. Without questioning, there is no inquiry, no investigation, no movement toward understanding. The Buddha never discouraged sincere inquiry, but he also saw clearly where inquiry must eventually come to rest. There is a moment on the path when questions no longer lead to clarity. They lead to exhaustion. This moment is not a failure of intelligence. It is a maturation of wisdom. In meditation, practitioners often experience this shift subtly. At first, the mind is busy trying to understand the practice. Am I doing this right? Is this thought okay? Should I focus more? Why am I distracted? Each question pulls attention away from direct experience and back into conceptual thinking. Gradually, through sustained silence and observation, the practitioner begins to notice something simple yet profound. Every question arises as a thought, and like all thoughts, it appears, lingers briefly, and disappears. The question itself is impermanent. When this is seen clearly, the urgency behind questioning weakens. The mind starts to recognize that questions do not need to be answered to dissolve. They need to be understood as movements of mind. This understanding does not come through reasoning. It comes through stillness. In deep meditation, there are moments when awareness is so settled that no question arises at all. Not because the mind is dull or blank, but because it is complete. There is no sense of lack driving inquiry. Experience is fully met as it is. This is the moment where no question remains. It is not dramatic. There is no declaration of enlightenment. There is simply an absence of seeking. The mind is not reaching forward or backward. It is resting. The Buddha described this as the cessation of craving. Not only craving for pleasure, but craving for answers, certainty, and control. As long as the mind believes that something is missing, it will continue to ask. When the mind sees directly that nothing is lacking, questions naturally fall silent. This does not mean that the practitioner has understood everything. It means they have understood enough to stop grasping. Many people misunderstand this stage, believing that spiritual maturity means having answers to every existential question. In reality, it means no longer being disturbed by unanswered questions. The need to resolve everything conceptually fades. Silence takes its place. This silence is not ignorance. It is intimacy with reality. The practitioner is no longer standing outside experience, interrogating it. They're inside it, living it. In this state, insight arises without effort. Understanding appears not as conclusions, but as clarity. The mind sees cause and effect directly. It sees impermanence unfolding moment by moment. It sees how clinging creates tension and how letting go brings ease. There is no need to ask why these things happen. They are visible. The Buddha often emphasized direct seeing over explanation. He compared it to tasting salt in water. One does not need a theory to know the water is salty. One tastes and knows. In the same way, when awareness is clear, truth is self-evident. Questions belong to the realm of thought. Truth belongs to the realm of experience. In silence, experience takes precedence. This moment where no question remains is not permanent. Like all conditioned states, it arises and passes. But it leaves a deep impression. The mind learns that peace does not depend on resolution. It depends on presence. After such moments, practitioners often notice a change in how questions arise. They are lighter, less compulsive. Curiosity remains, but desperation is gone. Inquiry becomes playful rather than urgent. This is a sign of maturity on the path. The Buddha did not ask his disciples to stop thinking or questioning altogether. He asked them to see the nature of thought and questioning clearly. When seen clearly, attachment loosens. The danger lies not in questioning, but in believing that answers will save us. Many people spend their lives searching for the perfect philosophy, the ultimate teaching, the final explanation. They move from book to book, teacher to teacher, hoping that one day the right words will dissolve their suffering. The Buddha offered a different possibility. He suggested that suffering ends not when the right answer is found, but when the need for answers ends. This does not happen through suppression. It happens through understanding. In meditation, when a mind is quiet and attentive, questions may still arise. But instead of following them, the practitioner listens to them. What is the energy behind this question? Is it fear? Is it desire? Is it habit? Seen in this way, questions become teachers. They reveal the movements of a mind. And once their function is understood, they lose their grip. Silence absorbs them naturally. There's a deep relief in this. The mind that has been working tirelessly to solve itself is finally allowed to rest. The burden of understanding everything is laid down. This rest is not passivity. It is clarity without strain. In this clarity, compassion deepens. When one no longer needs answers to feel complete, one stops demanding them from others. Conversations become more open. Differences are tolerated. Uncertainty is no longer threatening. Silence creates space for humility. The Buddha embodied this humility. He did not claim omniscience in the way people expected. He did not answer questions that did not lead to liberation. His silence was an acknowledgement of mystery, not as something to fear, but as something to respect. Mystery does not need to be solved to be lived. In the moment where no question remains, the practitioner touches this mystery directly. There's a sense of belonging to life rather than standing apart from it. The boundary between observer and observed softens. This is not an idea. It is a felt experience. The mind becomes simple. Breath is breath. Sensation is sensation. Awareness is aware. Nothing needs to be added. This simplicity is the heart of Buddhist awakening. It does not make one special. It does not elevate one above others. It dissolves the need for such comparisons. There is no longer a question of being ahead or behind. There is just this. The moment where no question remains is not the end of the path. It is a glimpse of its essence. Afterward, life continues. Challenges arise. Emotions fluctuate. Questions return. But something fundamental has shifted. The practitioner knows, from direct experience, that silence is sufficient. That awareness can hold everything. That peace is not somewhere else, waiting to be explained. It is here, waiting to be noticed. And so, the journey continues, not driven by the hunger for answers, but guided by the quiet confidence of presence. A confidence that does not speak loudly. A confidence that does not argue. A confidence that rests quietly in silence. In human relationships, words are often seen as the primary bridge between hearts. We are taught that communication solves problems, that expressing ourselves clearly prevents misunderstanding, and that speaking up is a sign of strength. While this is often true, there is another truth that is rarely acknowledged. There are moments when words do not heal, but harm. In those moments, silence speaks more clearly than anything we could say. The Buddha understood this deeply. His teaching on right speech was not merely about choosing kind or truthful words. It was about understanding the impact of speech, when it brings clarity and when it creates suffering. Sometimes, the most skillful response is no response at all. Most conflicts do not arise because of a lack of words, but because of too many. People speak not to understand, but to defend themselves. They speak from hurt, fear, and pride. Each sentence becomes a shield or a weapon. In such conditions, communication stops being a bridge and turns into a battlefield. Silence interrupts this cycle. When someone speaks in anger, the immediate impulse is to respond. The mind rushes to justify, correct, or retaliate. This reaction feels natural, even necessary. But it is precisely this reflex that fuels conflict. The Buddha observed that anger feeds on opposition. When met with resistance, it grows stronger. When met with silence, it often loses its force. This silence is not indifference. It is restraint. Restraint in Buddhism is not suppression. It is awareness choosing not to act on impulse. It is a recognition that not every thought needs expression and not every emotion needs a voice. Consider a moment of accusation. One person feels wronged and speaks harshly. If the other responds immediately, even calmly, the exchange continues. Words keep the energy moving. Silence, however, changes the dynamic. It creates a pause. In that pause, the emotional charge has space to settle. Often, people speak not because they need an answer, but because they need to be heard. Silence, when accompanied by presence, can fulfill this need more deeply than words. It communicates attention without judgment. It allows the speaker to hear themselves. This is why silence can be more powerful than reassurance. In relationships, especially intimate ones, words are frequently used to manage discomfort. We explain ourselves to avoid being misunderstood. We argue to protect our identity. We justify our actions to reduce guilt. Silence removes these strategies. It asks us to sit with discomfort rather than escape it. This is difficult. Silence exposes vulnerability. It removes the armor of explanation. Yet it is precisely this vulnerability that allows genuine connection to arise. The Buddha taught that suffering is perpetuated by clinging to views, identities, and narratives. In communication, clinging manifests as the need to be right. Silence loosens this grip. Without words to defend a position, the position itself becomes less solid. This does not mean that truth should never be spoken. The Buddha did not advocate silence at the cost of integrity. He spoke firmly when speech was necessary to prevent harm or guide others toward wisdom. But he chose his moments carefully. His silence was intentional, not habitual. Skillful silence is rooted in clarity. In everyday life, many misunderstand silence as avoidance. They assume that if someone does not speak, they are withdrawing or refusing to engage. But there is a profound difference between silent avoidance and silent presence. Silent avoidance is driven by fear. Silent presence is driven by awareness. In silent presence, the body is open. Attention is steady. The heart is receptive. Nothing is pushed away. This kind of silence communicates safety. It tells the other person, I am here with you, even if I do not speak. This is especially important in moments of pain. When someone is suffering, our instinct is to comfort with words. We offer advice, explanations, or encouragement. Often, these words are more about easing our own discomfort than truly helping the other. Silence, by contrast, allows pain to exist without being fixed. This does not mean abandoning the person. It means honoring their experience. The Buddha exemplified this compassion. He did not rush to eliminate suffering with platitudes. He acknowledged it fully. His silence allowed others to feel seen without being rushed through their pain. In conflict, silence also reveals intention. When words stop, what remains is energy. Tone, presence, body language. These communicate more honestly than speech. A calm silence conveys steadiness. An agitated silence conveys resistance. Learning to be silent without closing the heart is a practice. This practice requires self-awareness. Silence can easily become a tool of control or punishment. Withholding speech to manipulate or dominate is not wisdom. It deepens separation. Buddhist silence is never aggressive. It is inclusive. This distinction is subtle but crucial. When silence is chosen from awareness, it carries warmth. When chosen from fear or resentment, it carries coldness. The listener can feel the difference. In communication, silence allows space for reflection. It slows the pace of interaction. It prevents reactive escalation. It gives both parties time to sense what truly matters. Many arguments persist simply because no one pauses. The Buddha emphasized mindfulness of speech precisely because speech is powerful. Once spoken, words cannot be taken back. Silence preserves possibility. It keeps the situation open. In modern culture, speed is valued. Immediate response is expected. Silence is often interpreted as weakness or incompetence. Yet the deepest wisdom often moves slowly. It waits for the right moment. Silence allows wisdom to catch up with emotion. In relationships, this can be transformative. A pause before responding can prevent regret. A moment of silence can reveal whether a response is necessary at all. Many conflicts dissolve simply because one person chooses not to add more words. Silence also invites accountability. When there is no immediate rebuttal, the speaker is left with their own words. They may reconsider. They may soften. They may realize that what they said was not what they meant. Words often distract us from this realization. Silence brings it forward. The Buddhist teaching encourages us to ask not only, is this true, but also, is this beneficial, and is this the right time? Silence is the answer when the timing is wrong. This does not diminish the value of communication. It refines it. When words arise from silence, they carry more weight. They are fewer, but clearer. They are not driven by urgency, but by intention. In this way, silence does not replace communication. It purifies it. When silence speaks more than words, it is because it speaks from presence. It speaks through listening. It speaks through restraint. It speaks through compassion. And those who learn to hear it discover that some of the most meaningful exchanges in life happen without a single word being spoken. From early childhood, human beings learn to protect an image. We are taught who we are, what we should be proud of, and what must be defended. Over time, this image becomes rigid. Any challenge to it feels like a personal attack. Words spoken by others are interpreted not as sounds or perspectives, but as threats to identity. In this way, the habit of self-defense becomes deeply ingrained. The Buddha observed that much of human suffering arises from this reflex. When the self is defended through words, the mind is already in conflict. Even before a response is spoken, there is tension, an urge to explain, justify, correct, or dominate. This urge is fueled by fear. Fear of being misunderstood, diminished, or rejected. Speech becomes a shield, and silence feels dangerous. Yet the Buddha taught that true strength lies not in defending the self, but in seeing through it. The idea of a fixed, solid self is a construction. It is made of memories, labels, roles, and stories. We defend it because we believe it is who we are. But when examined closely, this self is found to be unstable, constantly changing, and dependent on conditions. Defending something that does not truly exist in a fixed way is exhausting. In communication, this exhaustion becomes evident. Arguments escalate not because facts differ, but because identities collide. Each person speaks from a need to protect their version of self. Listening stops. Silence becomes impossible, because silence would mean exposure. The Buddha's path invites a different response. When someone criticizes us, the habitual reaction is to respond immediately. We feel a tightening in the body, a surge of heat, a rush of thoughts preparing a defense. This moment is crucial. It reveals how deeply attached we are to self-image. If we speak from this place, our words are not guided by wisdom. They are guided by fear. Silence, in this moment, is not weakness. It is investigation. By not defending the self immediately, we allow space to observe what is happening. What exactly is being threatened? Is it our safety, or merely our image? Is there actual harm, or only discomfort? Often, what we are defending is not truth but pride. The Buddha encouraged practitioners to look directly at this impulse. In meditation, when thoughts of self arise, I am right, I am wrong, I am better, I am worse, they are observed without engagement. Over time, their power diminishes. The practitioner begins to see that these thoughts are not commands. They are habits. The same practice applies in communication. When we choose silence instead of immediate self-defense, we interrupt the habit. We give ourselves time to see clearly. The emotional charge begins to settle. The urgency to respond fades. In this space, discernment becomes possible. Sometimes we realize that no response is needed. The words spoken by the other person lose their significance when they're no longer interpreted as attacks on identity. Sometimes we realize that there is truth in the criticism, and silence allows us to receive it without resistance. This openness is transformative. The Buddha did not teach passivity. He did not ask people to accept abuse or injustice silently. The wisdom of not defending the self applies to ego, not to ethical responsibility. When harm is present, action may be necessary. But action arising from clarity is very different from reaction arising from wounded identity. Silence helps distinguish between the two. When the self is not defended, something unexpected happens. Communication becomes less personal and more truthful. Without the need to protect an image, we can listen more deeply. We can acknowledge without collapsing. We can speak without aggression. This is a profound freedom. Defensiveness narrows perception. Silence widens it. In silence, we notice tone, intention, and context. We hear what is beneath the words. Often, criticism carries pain. Attack hides vulnerability. When the self is not defended, compassion becomes possible. The Buddha exemplified this again and again. He was criticized, insulted, and misunderstood. Yet he rarely defended himself. Not because he was indifferent, but because he was free from the need to protect an identity. His silence communicated confidence without arrogance. People often mistake defensiveness for confidence. In reality, defensiveness reveals insecurity. Confidence does not need constant affirmation. It rests in awareness, not in approval. When we stop defending the self, we discover that nothing essential is lost. The fear that silence will diminish us proves unfounded. On the contrary, we feel more grounded, less reactive, more present. This does not mean that our perspectives disappear. It means they are no longer weapons. They become offerings, shared when appropriate, withheld when unnecessary. The Buddha taught that clinging to views is a major cause of suffering. Views include opinions about ourselves. When these are held tightly, every interaction becomes a test. Silence loosens this grip. In relationships, this wisdom changes everything. Arguments become less frequent. Tension dissolves more quickly. There is room for difference without division. When someone disagrees with us and we do not rush to defend, we send a powerful message. My sense of self is not dependent on winning this exchange. This message, though unspoken, is felt. It invites mutual respect. There is also a deep humility in not defending the self. It acknowledges that we do not need to be seen a certain way to exist fully. This humility is not self-negation. It is self-understanding. The Buddha referred to this as non-attachment to self. It is not the erasure of individuality, but the release of identification. One still acts, speaks, and relates, but without the constant reference to me. Silence supports this release. In moments of accusation or misunderstanding, silence gives the self less to cling to. Without immediate words, the story of I cannot escalate. The mind learns to rest without constant reinforcement. This rest is healing. Over time, practitioners notice that silence no longer feels like exposure. It feels like shelter, a place where the self does not need to perform. In this shelter, authenticity grows. Words, when spoken, are simpler and more honest. They are not designed to impress or protect. They are designed to communicate. The wisdom of not defending the self does not eliminate all conflict, but it changes its nature. Conflict becomes an opportunity for understanding rather than a threat to identity. This wisdom is not gained through theory. It is cultivated through practice, through countless small moments of choosing silence over reaction. Each time we pause instead of defending, we weaken the habit. Each time we listen instead of arguing, we strengthen awareness. Each time we allow the self to be questioned without collapsing, we grow. The Buddha's teaching is clear. Liberation is not found in perfecting the self, but in seeing through it. Silence is one of the most powerful tools for this aim. When the self no longer demands defense, communication becomes lighter. Relationships become more spacious. Life becomes less of a struggle to maintain an image and more of a process of presence. And in that presence, something deeply human and deeply peaceful emerges, without needing to be defended at all. One of the deepest human instincts is the urge to fix. When we encounter pain, our own or someone else's, the mind immediately searches for solutions. Advice forms quickly. Explanations follow. Words rush in to fill the discomfort of not knowing what to do. In many cultures, this impulse is praised. Helping is equated with offering answers. Yet the Buddha recognized a subtle truth. Not all suffering needs to be fixed. Much of it needs to be witnessed. To hold space without trying to fix is a radical act of compassion. It requires silence, patience, and the willingness to remain present with discomfort without attempting to remove it. This form of presence is rare, precisely because it asks us to surrender control. When someone is suffering, words often become a defense against our own helplessness. We speak to feel useful. We offer advice to avoid feeling powerless. We explain to distance ourselves from pain. In doing so, we may unintentionally dismiss the other person's experience. Silence, when grounded in presence, does the opposite. It says, your pain is allowed here. In Buddhist understanding, suffering arises from resistance to what is. This resistance is not limited to the one who suffers. It also appears in those who witness suffering. We resist by trying to change, solve, or bypass the experience. Silence removes this resistance. The Buddha often sat with people in their pain without immediately offering instruction. He allowed their suffering to be fully seen. This was not neglect. It was respect. When pain is met with silence, something unexpected happens. The person who suffers begins to feel safe enough to feel more deeply. Emotions that were held back emerge. Tears flow. Words slow down. The need to perform or explain fades. This is healing. Holding space does not mean doing nothing. It means doing something inwardly, remaining open, attentive, and compassionate. It means listening not only to words, but to tone, body language, and silence itself. This kind of listening requires the ego to step aside. There is no role to play, no solution to deliver, no identity to protect. There is only presence. In relationships, this presence can feel unfamiliar. Many people are conditioned to expect advice. Silence can initially be misinterpreted as indifference. But when silence is paired with warmth, eye contact, relaxed posture, attentive breathing, it communicates care more powerfully than speech. The Buddha taught that compassion is not about eliminating suffering at all costs. It is about meeting suffering with understanding. Sometimes understanding takes the form of words. Sometimes it takes the form of silence. Knowing the difference is wisdom. When someone shares grief, there's often nothing that can be said to make it better. Attempts to console with explanations about impermanence or positivity can feel hollow. Silence, on the other hand, honors the depth of loss. It does not rush the process. Grief moves at its own pace. Silence respects that pace. Holding space also requires trust. Trust in the other person's capacity to heal. When we rush to fix, we imply that they cannot handle their pain. Silence communicates confidence in their resilience. This trust is empowering. The Buddha believed deeply in each person's ability to awaken. He did not position himself as a savior. He pointed the way and allowed others to walk. His silence reflected this trust. In modern life, the urge to fix is amplified by speed. Conversations move quickly. Discomfort is treated as a problem to be solved immediately. Silence feels inefficient, yet healing is not efficient. It is organic. When we hold space, we slow time. We allow experience to unfold without pressure. This slowing has a calming effect on the nervous system. The body begins to relax. Breathing deepens. Safety is felt. In this state, insight often arises naturally. The person may come to their own understanding, not because it was explained, but because they had the space to feel and reflect. This is far more effective than advice. Holding space without trying to fix also applies to ourselves. When difficult emotions arise in meditation, the impulse is to correct them, to calm down, to feel better. The Buddha taught a different approach. Allow the emotion to be there without interference. This inner holding is a form of self-compassion. When we sit with our own pain in silence, without trying to change it, we learn that emotions are impermanent. They move, peak, and pass. The need to fix diminishes. Trust grows. The same principle applies outwardly. Silence creates a container in which truth can emerge. Without being rushed toward resolution, complexity is allowed. Contradictions coexist. Uncertainty is tolerated. This tolerance is rare in a world obsessed with certainty. The Buddha understood that forcing clarity too soon creates more confusion. Some understanding must ripen. Silence provides the conditions for this ripening. There's also humility in holding space. It acknowledges that we do not always know what is best for another person. It respects the mystery of their inner life. This humility deepens connection. In moments of collective suffering, illness, loss, trauma, silence often becomes the most appropriate response. Words can feel intrusive. Silence, shared among people, creates a sense of togetherness that transcends explanation. The Buddha's community valued this shared silence. Noble silence was practiced not as withdrawal, but as a way of being together without distraction. In silence, differences softened, presence deepened. Holding space without fixing is an extension of this practice. It requires us to tolerate our own discomfort with not knowing, to resist the urge to be helpful in visible ways, to trust that presence itself is an offering. This trust grows with practice. Each time we choose silence over advice, listening over explanation, we strengthen our capacity for compassion. Over time, people begin to feel this difference. They may not remember what we said, but they remember how they felt in our presence. Safe, seen, not rushed. This is the gift of silence. The Buddha's teaching reminds us that liberation is not a product to be delivered. It is a process to be supported. Holding space honors this process. In a world that constantly seeks to fix, silence becomes a radical form of care. It does not solve problems. It allows healing. And often, that is exactly what is needed. The mind speaks constantly. Even in moments of rest, it narrates, evaluates, compares, and anticipates. This inner voice is so familiar that most people mistake it for themselves. They believe that if the voice stops, something essential will be lost. Yet in Buddhist understanding, it is precisely when the mind stops talking that healing truly begins. Suffering is sustained by repetition. A painful event occurs once, but the mind replays it again and again. A mistake is made, and the inner voice revisits it relentlessly, adding layers of regret and self-judgment. Fear arises, and the mind projects countless scenarios into the future. This continuous commentary keeps the nervous system activated, the body tense, and the heart guarded. Healing cannot take place in this state. The Buddha observed that much of what people call suffering is not the raw experience itself, but the mental proliferation that follows it. Pain is natural. The story about pain is optional. Yet most people are unaware of this distinction. They try to heal by changing the story, by finding better explanations, by convincing themselves to think differently. But thought cannot heal the wounds created by thought. When a mind finally grows quiet, even briefly, the body responds immediately. Breathing deepens, muscles soften, the constant vigilance relaxes. This response reveals an important truth. The body has been waiting for silence. The nervous system does not understand philosophical insight. It understands safety. Silence signals safety. In meditation, this becomes clear. When the practitioner stops engaging with inner dialogue, the body begins to regulate itself. Heart rate slows. Digestion improves. Tension stored in the muscles starts to release. These changes are not imagined. They are physiological. The mind's silence allows the body to do what it knows how to do: heal. The Buddha did not separate mental suffering from physical experience. He understood that the mind and body are interdependent. A restless mind creates a restless body. A quiet mind allows the body to return to balance. This is why silence is not merely a spiritual concept. It is a biological necessity. Modern life rarely permits this silence. Even in moments of rest, people consume information. They distract themselves with screens, conversations, and constant stimulation. The body never fully enters a state of recovery. Stress becomes chronic. Healing is delayed. Silence interrupts this pattern. When the mind stops talking, unresolved emotions surface. At first, this can be uncomfortable. Sadness may arise. Anger may appear. Fear may be felt more clearly than before. Many people interpret this as regression. They believe that silence is making them worse. In truth, silence is revealing what has been suppressed. The Buddha taught that what is resisted persists. Emotions that are pushed away do not disappear. They lodge themselves in the body. They manifest as tension, fatigue, illness, and chronic unease. Silence removes the pressure to suppress. It allows emotions to be felt without being acted upon. This is the beginning of emotional healing. When sadness is allowed to be present without commentary, it moves. When anger is felt without judgment, it transforms. When fear is met without resistance, it softens. These processes cannot be forced. They unfold naturally when the mind stops interfering. Healing does not require analysis. It requires allowance. The inner voice often believes it is helping. It tries to make sense of pain. It seeks reasons and solutions. But in doing so, it keeps attention focused on the wound. Silence shifts attention away from explanation and toward experience. This shift is crucial. Experience completes itself. Stories do not. The Buddha emphasized mindful awareness as the foundation of healing. Mindfulness is not thinking about experience. It is being with experience. When the mind is quiet, awareness becomes clear. Sensations are felt directly. Emotions are recognized as energies moving through the body. This recognition brings relief. Another aspect of healing through silence is rest from self-judgment. The inner voice often carries harsh criticism. It evaluates every feeling, labeling it as weakness or failure. Silence suspends this judgment. In silence, there is no commentary telling us how we should feel. This absence of judgment is deeply compassionate. Many people have never experienced themselves without criticism. Silence offers this experience. For the first time, they're allowed to exist without being corrected. This unconditional presence is healing in itself. The Buddha described this as non-harming, applied inwardly. Silence is a form of kindness toward the mind. Healing also involves grieving what has been lost. Loss is inevitable. Loss of youth, health, relationships, certainty. The mind often avoids grief by staying busy. Silence brings grief into awareness. Tears may come without a clear reason. A sense of heaviness may appear. This is not pathology. It is release. Grief does not require interpretation. It requires space. Silence provides that space. When the mind stops talking, the heart speaks, not in words, but in sensations and emotions. This language is older than thought. It is the language of the body and the nervous system. Healing happens at this level, not at the level of ideas. The Buddha trusted this process. He did not urge people to suppress their pain or to replace it with positive thinking. He invited them to sit with it, to observe it, to allow it to be. This invitation is radical in a culture that values control. Silence teaches patience. Healing unfolds at its own pace. The mind's commentary often demands quick results. Silence removes this pressure. It allows the body-mind system to reorganize itself naturally. Over time, practitioners notice a change. Emotional reactions become less intense. Recovery from stress is faster. There is more resilience. These changes are not achieved through effort. They emerge from stillness. The mind learns that it does not need to comment on every sensation to survive. It can rest. This rest is not collapse. It is renewal. Silence also reveals the impermanent nature of suffering. When the mind is quiet, one can observe pain arising and passing without interference. This direct observation undermines the belief that suffering is permanent or defining. This realization is deeply healing. The Buddha taught that liberation begins with seeing clearly. Silence clears the lens. It removes distortion created by excessive thinking. What remains is simple awareness. In this awareness, healing happens not as an event, but as a process. Each moment of silence allows the system to reset slightly. Over time, these moments accumulate. The baseline of tension lowers. The heart opens. Healing begins not when we find the right words, but when we stop repeating the wrong ones. Silence is not a cure-all. It does not eliminate pain entirely, but it changes our relationship to pain. It removes the secondary suffering created by resistance and rumination. This change is profound. When the mind stops talking, we discover that we are not broken. We are tired. We are overwhelmed. We are in need of rest. Silence gives us that rest. And in that rest, the body remembers how to heal. Grief does not arrive with clear instructions. It enters silently, settles deeply, and alters the landscape of the heart. One day life is familiar, and the next it is irrevocably changed. Someone is gone. Something precious has ended. What remains feels incomplete, unstable, and painfully quiet. In moments of loss, people often search desperately for words. Words to explain what happened. Words to make sense of the pain. Words to comfort, reassure, or promise that everything will be all right. Yet grief has a way of rendering language insufficient. Non explanation feels adequate. No reassurance truly reaches the wound. The Buddha understood this limitation of words. He taught that suffering born of loss cannot be argued away or resolved through logic. Impermanence is not a concept to be accepted intellectually. It is a reality that must be felt. Grief is the heart's encounter with impermanence, and that encounter is rarely gentle. In Buddhist understanding, grief is not a mistake. It is not a weakness. It is love responding to separation. When something matters deeply, its loss is felt deeply. To grieve is to acknowledge connection. The problem does not lie in grief itself, but in how we relate to it. Modern culture often treats grief as something to overcome quickly. There is an unspoken expectation to return to normal, to stay functional, to move on. Silence around grief is uncomfortable, so it is filled with advice, encouragement, or forced optimism. These responses are well-intentioned, but they often miss the mark. Grief does not need to be fixed. It needs to be honored. The Buddha's approach to grief was rooted in presence. When faced with suffering, he did not rush to soothe with explanations. He allowed space. He recognized that some pain cannot be healed by words, only held. This holding takes the form of sacred quiet. Sacred quiet is not the absence of care. It is care expressed without intrusion. It is the willingness to sit beside suffering without demanding that it change. In this quiet, grief is given dignity. When someone is grieving, silence can feel more supportive than any sentence. Words often impose meaning too quickly. Silence allows meaning to emerge naturally in its own time. In meditation, grief may arise unexpectedly. A memory surfaces. A sense of longing appears. Tears come without warning. The instinct may be to distract or suppress. The Buddha taught a different response: remain present. To sit with grief in silence is an act of courage. It means allowing the ache to be felt in the body, tightness in the chest, heaviness in the stomach, pressure behind the eyes. These sensations are grief's language. When the mind stops talking, the body speaks. This bodily expression of grief is not something to fear. It is the process of integration. Loss disrupts the system. Silence allows the system to reorganize. If grief is constantly explained, analyzed, or resisted, it remains incomplete. It becomes chronic. But when it is met with quiet attention, it moves, it breathes, it transforms. The Buddha described this transformation not as forgetting, but as softening. The sharp edges of pain gradually lose their intensity. The memory remains, but it no longer pierces. Silence plays a crucial role in this softening. In sacred quiet, grief is no longer something to escape. It becomes something to accompany. The relationship shifts from opposition to intimacy. One is no longer fighting loss, but learning to live with its presence. This does not mean resignation. It means acceptance without collapse. Acceptance in Buddhism is not approval. It is acknowledgement of reality as it is. Grief demands this acknowledgement. It resists being bypassed. Silence supports this honesty. Another dimension of sacred quiet is its ability to dissolve isolation. Grief often feels lonely, even when others are present. People may not know what to say. The bereaved may feel misunderstood. Silence, when shared, bridges this gap. Sitting quietly with someone who is grieving communicates solidarity. It says, "You are not alone in this." No explanation is required. The shared presence speaks. The Buddha's community practiced this kind of presence. Noble silence was not withdrawal, but companionship without distraction. In silence, people could grieve together without comparison or judgment. This practice is deeply relevant today. Many fear silence around grief because they believe it will intensify pain. In reality, silence allows pain to complete its natural cycle. When a mind stops narrating loss, replaying what should have been, imagining what might have been, the raw feeling is allowed to move. The stories of grief keep it alive. The feeling of grief allows it to pass. Silence separates the two. Loss also confronts us with uncertainty. Death, endings, and separation remind us that nothing is guaranteed. The mind reacts by seeking explanations. Why did this happen? What does it mean? Could it have been prevented? These questions are understandable, but they rarely bring peace. The Buddha often responded to such questioning with silence, not because the questions were wrong, but because the answers would not ease the heart. In the face of impermanence, understanding comes not through explanation, but through presence. Sacred quiet allows us to stand before mystery without needing to solve it. In this quiet, something unexpected can occur. Alongside grief, gratitude may arise. Love remembered, connection felt beyond form. These experiences are subtle and easily drowned out by mental noise. Silence allows them to be felt. This does not erase pain. It deepens meaning. The Buddha taught that impermanence does not negate love. It reveals its preciousness. Grief is painful because love was real. Silence honors both. Over time, those who sit with grief in silence notice a shift. The pain becomes less consuming. Space opens around it. Life continues, not because grief has ended, but because it has been integrated. Silence makes this integration possible. In daily life, creating space for sacred quiet does not require retreating from the world. It can be as simple as pausing when grief arises, allowing a few breaths without commentary. It can be choosing not to explain one's pain away. It can be listening to another's loss without interrupting. These small acts of silence accumulate. They create an inner environment where healing can occur. The Buddha did not promise freedom from loss. He promised freedom in the midst of loss. This freedom is not the absence of grief, but the absence of resistance to it. Silence is the doorway to this freedom. When grief is met with sacred quiet, it is no longer an enemy. It becomes a teacher. It teaches impermanence not as a theory, but as lived truth. It teaches compassion, both for oneself and others. It teaches humility before life's unpredictability. Most importantly, it teaches that even in profound loss, there's a ground that does not collapse. That ground is awareness itself, silent, spacious, and capable of holding everything. In this awareness, grief is allowed to be exactly what it is. And in being allowed, it slowly, gently transforms, not into forgetting, but into wisdom. Forgiveness is often misunderstood as a spoken act. An apology is offered. Words apart and are exchanged. A conversation takes place, and it is assumed that healing will follow. Yet in many cases, even after the right words are said, the heart remains heavy. Resentment lingers. Pain resurfaces. The mind continues to replay the past. The Buddha understood that true forgiveness does not begin with words. It begins in silence. Forgiveness, in its deepest sense, is not something we give to another person. It is something we release within ourselves. And release rarely happens through explanation. It happens through letting go. When someone hurts us, the mind reacts instinctively. It constructs a narrative. What happened? Who is at fault? What should have been different? This narrative repeats itself, often unconsciously, reinforcing anger and grief. The story becomes part of identity. We carry it with us, sometimes for years. Silence interrupts this process. When a mind grows quiet, the story loses momentum. Without constant repetition, its emotional charge begins to soften. Forgiveness becomes possible not because the past is justified, but because it is no longer clung to. The Buddha taught that holding on to anger is like grasping a burning coal with the intention of throwing it at someone else. We are the ones who get burnt. Forgiveness, then, is not an act of generosity, toward the one who caused harm. It is an act of wisdom toward oneself. Silence reveals this truth clearly. In meditation, practitioners often encounter resentment unexpectedly. A memory arises, a face appears, a feeling of injustice returns. The habitual response is to engage, rehearse arguments, imagine confrontation, relive the pain. This engagement keeps the wound open. The Buddha's instruction is simple, though not easy. Observe without feeding. When resentment is observed in silence, without justification or suppression, it begins to change. The tightness in the body becomes noticeable. The heat of anger is felt. The ache of sadness underneath emerges. These sensations are forgiveness in its earliest form. Forgiveness does not begin with understanding the other person. It begins with understanding one's own suffering. Silence allows this understanding to deepen. Without words to defend our position, we are left with the raw experience of pain. This pain is not abstract. It is physical. It lives in the body. When it is met with quiet attention, something remarkable happens. It begins to release. Release does not mean forgetting. It means no longer being consumed. The Buddha did not teach forgiveness as moral obligation. He taught it as freedom from bondage. Resentment binds us to the past. It keeps us in relationship with the one who caused harm, long after the external connection has ended. Silence cuts this bond. When the mind stops replaying the story, the past loses its grip. This does not require reconciliation or agreement. It requires presence. Many people fear that forgiving silently means excusing harm or allowing injustice. This fear arises from misunderstanding. Forgiveness does not negate accountability. It does not erase boundaries. It simply removes the poison of hatred from the heart. The Buddha was clear. Compassion does not mean tolerating abuse. Silence is not submission. Forgiveness in silence is an inner process, independent of external action. One may forgive internally and still choose distance. One may forgive internally and still speak firmly when necessary. The difference is that action arises from clarity rather than bitterness. Silence supports this clarity. Another obstacle to forgiveness is the belief that the other person must change first. The mind waits for an apology, acknowledgement, or remorse. This waiting keeps the wound active. Forgiveness becomes conditional. The Buddha taught unconditional release. In silence, we see that waiting for another to change only prolongs our own suffering. The other person may never understand. They may never apologize. They may never be available. Silence brings this reality into focus. In accepting this, the heart begins to loosen its grip. Forgiveness in silence also applies to oneself. Self-resentment is often more persistent than resentment toward others. Regret, shame, and self-blame repeat endlessly in the mind. Words are used to criticize, punish, and condemn the self. Silence interrupts this inner violence. When the mind stops talking, self-judgment loses its voice. What remains is sensation, heaviness, tightness, fatigue. These are signals of pain, not evidence of failure. When met with quiet attention, they soften. The Buddha emphasized compassion toward oneself as foundational. Without it, forgiveness toward others remains incomplete. Silence creates the conditions for this compassion. It allows us to feel our own pain without adding blame. In this quiet, forgiveness becomes natural. It is not a decision. It is a process. Forgiveness unfolds gradually as the heart releases its need to hold onto hurt. This release is subtle. It may happen over many sittings. It may come in waves. Silence provides continuity. It allows the process to continue without interference. The mind often wants closure through conversation. It imagines a final dialogue where everything is explained and resolved. This fantasy keeps resentment alive. Silence dissolves it. It brings attention back to the present moment where healing actually occurs. The Buddha's path is not about resolving the past. It is about freeing the present. In silence, we begin to see that forgiveness is not about the other person at all. It is about ending our own inner conflict. When this is seen clearly, the motivation shifts. Forgiveness is no longer a burden. It is a relief. There is also humility in silent forgiveness. It acknowledges that we do not fully understand the conditions that shaped another's actions. This does not excuse harm. It contextualizes it. Silence allows this broader perspective to arise naturally, without forcing empathy. Empathy that is forced feels hollow. Empathy that arises in silence feels genuine. The Buddha taught that all beings act under the influence of ignorance and craving. Seeing this does not remove responsibility, but it reduces hatred. Silence helps this seeing mature. As forgiveness deepens, practitioners often notice physical changes. The body feels lighter. The chest feels more open. Breathing becomes easier. These changes are signs of release. The body registers forgiveness before the mind articulates it. This is why words are not necessary. Forgiveness in silence also changes how we relate to future harm. When resentment is no longer stored, the heart becomes more resilient. Boundaries are clearer. Responses are less reactive. We are less likely to accumulate new layers of bitterness. Silence trains this resilience. In daily life, practicing silent forgiveness may be as simple as noticing resentment arise and choosing not to feed it. Not rehearsing the story, not seeking validation, allowing the feeling to pass through without commentary. These small moments accumulate. Over time, the habit of resentment weakens. The Buddha did not promise that forgiveness would be easy. He promised that it would be liberating. Silence is the doorway to this liberation. Forgiveness spoken too early may be premature. Forgiveness demanded may be false. Forgiveness that arises in silence is authentic. It does not announce itself. It does not require acknowledgement. It simply leaves. When resentment leaves, space opens. In that space, peace appears, not as an achievement, but as a natural state. This peace does not depend on others behaving differently. It depends on our willingness to stop carrying what no longer serves us. Silence makes this willingness possible. In the end, forgiveness in silence is not about forgetting the past. It is about no longer living in it. It is about reclaiming the present moment from the grip of old wounds. The Buddha's teaching points us toward this reclamation again and again, not through argument, not through explanation, but through silence. A silence that does not deny pain, a silence that allows release, a silence in which the heart finally rests. For most of our lives, we live inside questions. We ask who we are, what we should do, why things happen the way they did, and how we might finally find peace. Even when one question is answered, another quickly replaces it. The mind moves from uncertainty to uncertainty, believing that resolution lies somewhere ahead, just beyond the next explanation. The Buddha saw this clearly. He did not condemn questioning. He understood its role. Questions awaken curiosity, and curiosity can open the path. But he also saw the point at which questions stop serving wisdom and begin feeding restlessness. There comes a moment, quiet, unremarkable, and deeply transformative, when silence itself ends the question. This ending does not happen because the mind has collected enough answers. It happens because the need for answers dissolves. In meditation, this moment often arrives unexpectedly. The practitioner may sit down with the usual concerns, carrying thoughts and inquiries into the stillness. At first, the mind continues its familiar pattern. Questions arise like echoes. Am I doing this correctly? Why does this feeling keep returning? What does this experience mean? Then gradually something shifts. The questions lose their urgency. They are still there, but they no longer pull attention. They arise and fade like distant sounds. Awareness remains steady, grounded in the immediacy of experience. Breath is felt. Sensation is known. Presence is complete. In this completeness, questioning feels unnecessary. The Buddha described this as a form of cessation, not the destruction of the mind, but the ending of compulsive seeking. Seeking always implies lack. It assumes that something essential is missing. when awareness rests fully in the present moment. This assumption is quietly exposed as false. Nothing is missing. This realization does not arrive with fanfare. There is no dramatic insight or intellectual conclusion. There is simply a sense of ease. The mind stops leaning forward. It stops trying to grasp or resolve. It settles. Silence holds everything without effort. At this point, the practitioner may notice something surprising. Peace does not depend on understanding why things are the way they are. It does not depend on solving the mysteries of life or answering metaphysical questions. It depends on intimacy with what is. The Buddha often emphasized this intimacy. He taught that suffering arises when we stand apart from experience, analyzing it endlessly instead of living it directly. Questions maintain this distance. Silence closes it. When silence ends the question, it is not because curiosity has died. It is because curiosity has matured into direct knowing. Direct knowing does not require language. It is immediate. It knows impermanence because it sees change happening. It knows non-attachment because it feels release. It knows peace because it rests in it. This knowing is self-validated. It does not need confirmation. Many practitioners misunderstand this stage, thinking that spiritual maturity means no longer having questions at all. In truth, questions may still arise. The difference is that they no longer dominate. They are no longer believed to hold the key to freedom. Freedom is already present. The Buddha's silence in response to certain questions reflects this understanding. He did not remain silent because the answers were secret or inaccessible. He remained silent because answering would have reinforced the illusion that liberation lies in explanation. Some questions, when answered, only generate more questions. Silence ends this cycle. In daily life, this shift can be subtle yet profound. Situations that once triggered endless mental debate now feel simpler. One still considers options, but without anxiety. Decisions are made without excessive rumination. Uncertainty is tolerated without panic. This tolerance is a sign of wisdom. When silence ends the question, trust emerges. Trust not in beliefs, but in awareness itself. One begins to trust that clarity will arise when needed, without forcing. This trust reduces strain. Life feels less like a problem to solve, and more like a process to participate in. The Buddha referred to this as letting go of views, not abandoning discernment, but releasing fixation. Views include not only opinions about the world, but beliefs about oneself. When these soften, the need to constantly define and defend disappears. Silence supports this softening. There is also humility in this stage. One recognizes that reality is larger than any explanation. Mystery is no longer threatening. It becomes part of life's texture. Silence allows mystery to exist without pressure. This acceptance is deeply peaceful. When silence ends the question, compassion deepens naturally. Without the need to understand everything, one becomes more patient with others' confusion. There is less urge to correct or convince. Listening becomes easier. Differences are tolerated. The Buddha's teaching emphasized this spaciousness. He did not demand that everyone adopt the same understanding. He trusted the path of each individual. His silence communicated this trust. In meditation, the moment where no question remains often coincides with a sense of unity. The boundary between observer and observed softens. There is simply experience unfolding within awareness. Breath, sensation, sound, and thought all appear in the same space. This space is silent, yet alive. The mind recognizes that it has been searching for something that has always been present. The search itself created the sense of distance. When a search stops, what remains is ordinary and extraordinary at the same time. Ordinary, because nothing new has appeared. Extraordinary, because nothing needs to be added. The Buddha pointed to this again and again. Liberation is not an acquisition. It is a relinquishment. Silence is the act of relinquishing the need to know. This does not make one passive or indifferent. On the contrary, action becomes more responsive. Without the burden of constant questioning, energy is freed. Attention becomes sharper. One engages with life more fully. Silence does not end inquiry, it purifies it. Inquiry becomes grounded in experience rather than speculation. Questions, when they arise, are simple and practical. They point toward care rather than control. They dissolve naturally when their function is fulfilled. The endless, anxious questioning of the self fades. In moments of difficulty, this shift is especially valuable. Pain still arises, loss still occurs, but the mind does not spiral into why me or how could this happen. Instead, there is presence with what is. Grief is felt, fear is acknowledged, but the added layer of existential struggle is absent. This absence is not numbness, it is clarity. The Buddha taught that suffering has layers. The first layer is unavoidable. The second layer, created by resistance and rumination, is optional. Silence removes this second layer. When silence ends the question, suffering becomes workable. It is no longer amplified by mental struggle. Healing proceeds naturally. This stage on the path does not mark the end of practice. It marks a change in orientation. Practice is no longer driven by dissatisfaction. It is guided by appreciation. One practices not to become something else, but to remain in touch with what has been recognized. Silence becomes a companion rather than a tool. In a world that values answers, this way of being may appear counterintuitive. People may ask, "Don't you want to understand?" The practitioner smiles inwardly, not from superiority, but from recognition. Understanding has shifted its form. It no longer arrives as a conclusion. It arrives as presence. When silence ends the question, life does not become simpler in appearance. Challenges remain. Complexity persists. But the inner relationship to complexity changes. There is less urgency, less fear, less grasping. There is space. The Buddha's final teaching, according to tradition, was a reminder of impermanence. He did not offer final answers. He pointed again to reality as it is. Silence is the place where this pointing becomes clear. When silence ends the question, we are no longer waiting for life to explain itself. We are living it, fully, quietly, as it is. Inner stillness is often misunderstood as a state reserved for meditation halls, monasteries, or moments of retreat. Many believe that once daily life resumes, with its responsibilities, relationships, and uncertainties, stillness must be left behind. The Buddha taught otherwise. Inner stillness is not an escape from life. It is a way of living within it. To live from inner stillness does not mean withdrawing from action. It means acting without agitation. It means speaking without compulsion, deciding without panic, and responding without resentment. Stillness is not inactivity, it is clarity in motion. For those who have touched silence deeply, even briefly, life begins to feel different. The mind no longer rushes to fill every moment with commentary. There is a pause before reaction, a space in which awareness settles. This pause becomes the foundation of a new way of being. The Buddha emphasized this pause. He described it as the moment between stimulus and response where freedom resides. In this moment, the practitioner is no longer driven by habit. Choice becomes possible. Living from inner stillness means learning to return to this pause again and again. At first, this return feels intentional. One notices tension arising and consciously relaxes. One hears harsh words and chooses not to respond immediately. One feels anxiety building and pauses to breathe. These are small acts, but they're transformative. Over time, stillness becomes less effortful. It is no longer something to remember. It is something that remembers itself. The mind begins to trust silence. It no longer fears that quiet will lead to collapse or confusion. Instead, silence becomes a reference point. When things feel overwhelming, the practitioner knows where to return. This return does not require special conditions. It can happen in the middle of a conversation, during work, while walking, or in moments of conflict. Inner stillness is portable. It does not depend on external quiet. The Buddha demonstrated this in his daily life. He moved through villages, engaged with people from all walks of life, faced criticism and misunderstanding, and yet remained grounded. His stillness did not isolate him. It allowed him to meet others without being pulled into their turbulence. Living from stillness changes how we relate to time. Urgency softens, not because things are less important, but because the mind is no longer frantic. There's a sense that things will unfold as they need to. Decisions are made with care rather than haste. This does not mean procrastination. It means discernment. When a mind is quiet, priorities become clearer. Energy is no longer scattered. One does less, but with greater presence. This presence enhances effectiveness. Stillness also transforms communication. Words arise from a deeper place. They are fewer, but more precise. There is less need to explain or defend. Silence becomes a natural part of conversation, not something to avoid. People often feel more at ease around someone who lives from inner stillness. There is less pressure to perform, less expectation to fill space. Stillness creates safety. This safety is not created by control, but by acceptance. When one is at ease with silence, others are invited to be at ease as well. The Buddha taught that the mind shapes experience. A restless mind creates a restless world. A still mind creates a peaceful one. This does not mean that external circumstances change, but that they are met differently. Living from stillness means accepting that life includes discomfort. Stillness does not eliminate pain, loss, or uncertainty. It changes how these experiences are held. Instead of being overwhelmed, one remains present. Presence does not require constant effort. It requires trust. Trust that awareness is sufficient. Trust that clarity will arise when needed. Trust that one does not need to anticipate every outcome. This trust grows through repeated experience. Each time one chooses stillness over reaction, the nervous system learns a new pattern. Over time, this pattern becomes natural. Living from inner stillness also deepens ethical sensitivity. When the mind is quiet, it is easier to sense the impact of one's actions. There is less rationalization, less self-deception. Compassion arises not as a rule, but as a felt response. The Buddha emphasized ethical conduct not as moral obligation, but as an expression of clarity. When the mind is still, harm feels unnecessary. Kindness feels obvious. This is not idealism. It is practicality. Stillness reduces inner conflict. With less inner conflict, there is less need to project it outward. Relationships become simpler. Boundaries become clearer. One can say no without guilt and yes without resentment. Living from stillness also changes the relationship to success and failure. Achievements are enjoyed without clinging. Mistakes are acknowledged without self-attack. There is less identification with outcomes. This freedom from identification does not lead to apathy. It leads to resilience. When setbacks occur, the mind returns to stillness instead of spiraling into blame or despair. One feels the disappointment, but does not become it. Recovery is faster. Learning is deeper. The Buddha referred to this as equanimity, not indifference, but balance. Equanimity allows one to stay present across changing conditions. Stillness is its foundation. Another aspect of living from stillness is the capacity to be alone without loneliness. Silence becomes nourishing rather than threatening. Solitude is experienced as fullness rather than absence. This capacity changes how one enters relationships. There is less need for validation, less fear of abandonment. Connection is chosen rather than clung to. The Buddha taught that attachment arises from fear of loss. Stillness reduces this fear by grounding the sense of self in awareness rather than external circumstances. When awareness is trusted, loss becomes survivable. Living from inner stillness also brings a different relationship to effort. One still makes effort, but without strain. The mind is engaged, but not tense. This quality of effort is sustainable. Burnout often arises not from doing too much, but from doing with resistance. Stillness removes resistance. Action becomes cleaner. This does not mean that life becomes easy. It means that difficulty is met without additional struggle. The Buddha's path is often misunderstood as renunciation. In truth, it is renunciation of unnecessary suffering. Stillness reveals what is unnecessary. Living from stillness is not a final state. It fluctuates. There are days when the mind is more reactive. There are moments when old habits resurface. Stillness is not lost in these moments. It is temporarily obscured. The practice is gentle return. Each return strengthens familiarity. Over time, the mind learns that stillness is always available. It is not created by perfect conditions. It is revealed by releasing resistance. In a world that rewards speed, noise, and constant engagement, living from inner stillness may appear countercultural. It may even be misunderstood, but its effects are tangible. Clarity replaces confusion. Compassion replaces reactivity. Presence replaces distraction. The Buddha did not ask his followers to withdraw from the world. He invited them to meet the world without losing themselves. Inner stillness is how this invitation is fulfilled. It is not a technique. It is a relationship to experience, to oneself, to others. A relationship grounded in awareness rather than fear. Living from inner stillness does not make life predictable. It makes it livable. And in that livability, something profound unfolds. Life is no longer something to endure or control. It becomes something to participate in fully and openly. Quietly rooted, gently responsive, deeply alive. At the end of all teachings, there is silence. The Buddha spoke for more than 40 years. He explained suffering and its end. He offered methods, disciplines, and guidance suited to countless minds. He adapted his words to kings and beggars, scholars and farmers, the grieving and the curious. Yet those who truly understood him knew that his deepest teaching was never contained in speech. It was carried in his silence. This silence was not absence. It was presence so complete that nothing needed to be added. It was not a rejection of language, but a recognition of its limits. Words could guide the seeker to the edge, but beyond that edge, only direct experience remained. The Buddha's unspoken teaching begins where explanation ends. Throughout the journey described in this book, from the noise of restless thought to the healing power of silence, from communication without words to forgiveness and inner stillness, one truth becomes increasingly clear: liberation is not achieved by accumulating understanding, but by relinquishing the need to grasp. Silence is the expression of this relinquishment. In Buddhist tradition, awakening is often described negatively. The cessation of craving, the ending of ignorance, the extinguishing of suffering. These descriptions point not to something added, but to something released. Silence embodies this release. It is what remains when striving falls away. The Buddha did not define awakening in elaborate metaphysical terms. He pointed instead to peace, freedom, and clarity, qualities that cannot be manufactured, only uncovered. His silence was a living demonstration of this uncovering. Those who sat with him noticed that his stillness was not fragile. It was unshakable. Praise did not inflate it. Criticism did not disturb it. Loss did not collapse it. Gain did not excite it. This equanimity was not indifference. It was intimacy with reality as it is. This intimacy is the heart of the unspoken teaching. The Buddha's silence taught impermanence without explanation. One could feel it in the way moments passed in his presence. Nothing clung to, nothing rejected. His silence taught non-self without argument. There was no need to assert identity when awareness was so clearly unbound. His silence taught compassion without sentimentality. It made space for others without demanding anything in return. These teachings could not be conveyed through doctrine alone. They had to be embodied. In the end, the Buddha did not ask his followers to believe in him. He asked them to see for themselves. This invitation was itself a form of silence. It withdrew authority and returned responsibility to the practitioner. Be a light unto yourselves, he said, not by giving new answers, but by encouraging direct seeing. The unspoken teaching reveals itself when the mind stops seeking confirmation. When the practitioner no longer needs to be told what is real, but recognizes it through presence. Silence becomes the medium of recognition. This recognition does not require withdrawal from the world. It does not require adopting special beliefs or identities. It requires only the willingness to stop interfering with experience. The Buddhist silence teaches us that life does not need to be solved. It needs to be lived. Many approach spiritual paths hoping to escape uncertainty. They seek certainty in doctrine, identity in belief, safety in answers. The Buddha offered something more radical, freedom within uncertainty. Silence is how this freedom is tasted. In silence, we discover that we can stand in not knowing without fear, that we can rest without control, that we can be present without explanation. This discovery changes everything. It changes how we suffer. Pain still arises, but it is no longer amplified by resistance. It changes how we love. Attachment softens into care without possession. It changes how we act. Effort becomes responsive rather than driven. The unspoken teaching is not something to remember. It is something to return to. Again and again, the Buddha returned to silence, not as a final statement, but as a continuous reminder. Each moment of silence invites the practitioner back to what is essential. What is essential does not speak loudly. It does not argue or persuade. It does not insist. It simply is. This is why silence is sometimes the greatest answer. It answers not by resolving questions, but by dissolving the need for them. It does not explain reality. It reveals it. At the end of the path, silence is not a conclusion. It is a beginning without expectation. The practitioner who has walked through all the stages, who has faced the fear of silence, entered stillness, listened without sound, forgiven without words, and learned to live from inner quiet, arrives not at a final truth, but at simplicity. Breathing is enough. Being is enough. Awareness is enough. The Buddha's unspoken teaching lives here. It lives in the pause before reacting, in the breath taken without commentary, in the presence offered without advice, in the forgiveness released without announcement. It lives wherever silence is trusted. This silence does not belong to Buddhism alone. It is universal. It is available to anyone willing to stop long enough to notice it. The Buddha did not create it. He recognized it and pointed others toward it. When we honor silence, we honor this recognition. The final teaching, then, is not a sentence to be memorized. It is an invitation to stop adding, to stop grasping, to stop narrating, to stop searching, and in that stopping, to discover that nothing essential has been lost, only what was unnecessary. The Buddha's unspoken teaching does not end with his passing. It continues every time someone chooses presence over noise, awareness over reaction, silence over compulsion. It continues now, in this moment. As you read these words and then let them go, what remains is not emptiness. It is peace, quiet, unannounced, and already here.